Okay, we are recording. I'm recording on the cloud. Is that correct? I hope.
It's correct. We are recording.
Perfect. We're just waiting for starting the stream, and then we'll really hit it off. Boop. Boop, boop, boop.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be worth the wait.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be absolutely great. This is we're trying a couple of new things, so which is why Christina, we're ready to go on YouTube.
I can see it.
You can see it. Okay, I'll take that as yes. Cool. Okay. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. We're super happy to have Jacqui speak in this venue of online of virtual domain-driven design about soft skills for technical professionals. Jacqui is an internationally recognized architect. She's the author of Communication Patterns, a guide for developers and architects. She teaches multiple workshops and speaks at international conferences where I met her, and I think she's great. So I'm extremely happy to introduce you to her in this great talk. And we're going to have some questions at the end. But if you have some questions as you're going, we can play them up, so you can put them in the chat, etc., and then so that you don't forget them. And without further ado, Jacqui, welcome to Virtual DDD.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Great introduction. Welcome, everybody. This is a talk about soft skills, which are a very neglected part of our skills, I would say. So this is based on a lot of the content from my book, which is called Communication Patterns. And if you take a look at the book website, it has a few freebies on there and some more information if you want to have a look at that. And also you can find me in all these places. But one of the things that you get as a bonus for coming to see this is that I have an ebook of my book to give away free. And the bonus thing about the ebook is that it's all in color. If you get it in the paperback version, which I've got one here, but this is all grayscale in here. So bonus if you get the ebook here. So if you go to this URL, then you can enter to win a copy, and I will randomly draw someone at the end. So I'll give you a couple of seconds just to do that. You can either use the QR code or type that small URL in. And what we're going to look at today are a selection of some of the patterns and anti-patterns which are part of this book. And the book is split into 4 sections. We've got the visual, which is all about diagrams. We're going to see a couple of those today. We've got the second section is called multimodal, and that's about written, verbal, and non-verbal. And we should get around to some written things today as well. We then part 3 is all about the sort of knowledge and documentation area and patterns and anti-patterns for communicating knowledge. And then part 4 is all about being in remote teams and working with people who are not in the same room as you, and all the patterns and anti-patterns that you can use to improve your communication there. So let's have a look at why soft skills are important. Now, if you're anything like Nikki here, you've probably in your career, if you haven't come up to the point where you've needed to make the decision about going technical or management, then you probably will do at one point. But you're probably thinking when this happens in the future, if you haven't had it already, which way am I going to go? What skills do I need to develop for either of these paths? And also, if you're spending a training budget, which some of us still have, a lot of people don't, or if you're at a conference, you get this sort of all these trying to weigh up whether you should be going to that technical talk, the one about Kubernetes, which is full of people and is really busy, or should you actually really be looking at these, like the more soft skills tracks? And you think, oh, I'm being pulled towards the technical stuff because, you know, that's what I'm paid to do. And we tend to try and solve problems with tech skills because, as I said, that's what we're paid to do. And we find out really that it doesn't work out, and technical skills can't solve everything. And although it may be pretty clear which technical skills you need to build, it's not so clear what soft skills you need to build. And so if you're like Nikki here, you're thinking, well, what skills do I need to build for either of these? Then the main thing you really need to know is that you need soft skills for both. And we're going to look at a few things which you will be able to put into practice straight away today. You don't need to buy the rest of the book. You've got all of these for today. So the first section, as I said, is called visual communication. Now, this is all about successfully conveying your message using diagrams and other visuals. And I talk about in the book a thing called visual literacy, which is the ability to understand and create these visuals that you need. And it's a skill that isn't really taught in any of the sort of formal architectural development courses. And so this is kind of the missing part, this whole part one of the book, which you need. And we're going to touch on, I think, 2 or 3 of these today, but I worked out that the amount that's in part 1, I couldn't actually fit that into a whole day training. So if you want to have a look at those, then have a look at the book. Now, first one is a pattern. This one's called Face in the Crowd, also known as Know Your Audience. And this is one that a lot of people kind of know. So different audiences need different levels of detail and different types of diagram, but it's quite often something we actually forget. So have a think when you're creating your diagram, who is your diagram going to be for? Who is the customer of your diagram? And once you've worked this out, you'll probably find out that for one diagram you have, that it's only for, say, developers. Another one might be only for customers, but then another one you might have it's for architects and developers, but also you're trying to communicate something to the product owner or somebody else, another stakeholder that's not particularly technical. And so that's when you really have to think about various things. And I'm going to give you 4 different questions that you can ask yourself. So the first one is, what is their technical understanding? So as I said, you might find that you have a bit of a mix, and therefore you're going to have to put some things in place so that the people who are less technical get the message, as well as the people who are technical get all the information they need. Then the next one is, what level of detail do they need? Because even whether they're technical or not, you need to work out, do I really need to put all of this information about all these different security protocols on here? Or actually, is that going to be cluttering up my diagram and just getting people asking me questions about what all these little bits mean? So think about what level of detail you're going to be putting onto that diagram. Then you need to think about, what do they want from you? And some of your stakeholders are going to have a very good idea of what they want to see, some not. Even those who do know what they want probably don't actually know what they need really. So you can think about that as well, and think about what they asked for, or what they not asked for that they really do need. And that leads on to the fourth question, which is, what do you want from them? Now, maybe you need them to sign off on a decision or make a decision based on a diagram that you've made for them. So you need to make sure they've got that information that they need to do what you want, whether they've asked for it or not. So a bit of a cyclical question there with those last two. And so when we look at some diagrams here, this one here is a class diagram, it's UML. And we can think about this and say, well, who is this actually for? Now, when I ask people this, they normally go, oh yes, this one's for technical people. This is for developers or architects or DBAs, database administrators and developers. And that's going to be what this kind of thing is for. Because if you show that to a product owner, it's got a lot of information on there that they don't really care about. All they care about is that you are meeting their requirements and their users' needs. They don't care what you're putting into a database. And they're just going to have questions about what the little pluses and minuses mean and the brackets. So they don't care about this, not for them. Now, if we look at a diagram like this one, which is a context diagram, and this is C4. If you haven't seen C4 before, there's a good website on it called c4model.com. And this is invented by Simon Brown. And it can be quite useful, especially the top two levels, because it looks at things at all these different levels of abstraction. And so this is the very top level. And these are really useful, a context diagram, whether it's C4 or not. These are really useful for anybody in a project, because even if a developer is right down in the weeds in the code, they should really know who's going to be using this system and what other systems that this system interfaces with, even if they're not directly working on that code. But also anyone who's non-technical will also benefit from this and be able to pick up on any problems as well, even if they're not particularly technical. So that's looking at the audience. Now, the next one I've got for you is an anti-pattern. And this one is quite often people's favorite. This one's called Explosion of Unicorns, also known as Too Many Colors. And this is the one that you want the ebook for, because you get some really good pictures like this one. And this is a little bit overwhelming. I think you'll agree. We've got a different color for each service because every single thing on here is a different thing. So why don't we color them something different? No, don't do that. I'm not going to say, though, that you can't use bright colors. You might want to tone it down a bit here, but having a different color for each thing is not useful information. It's just confusing and overwhelming. And you might as well give people something along the lines of this. So what we're trying to do here with our diagrams is communicate and not confuse and overwhelm people and make them put sunglasses on. So let's think about how we can use color to communicate. I've dialed back the colors a little bit here, so they're not quite as bright, but I've also reduced the number of colors. And that's very important here, because the more colors you have, the more people have got to try and fit in their working memory. And even if you've got a key, you are still going to overwhelm people with trying to work out what each color means. And if you put color in there that people that actually doesn't have meaning, people are going to try and ascribe meaning to it, because we naturally try and find patterns in things and try and find meaning. So first thing there is to minimize your color palette so that people don't get overwhelmed by it, but also actually use color to aid communication and don't just splat it in there when it hasn't got any meaning. If you don't want to put any meaning with color in there, then just make everything the same color. Preferably not a really bright red or something, but just make everything the same color. And so that's thinking about color in your communication there. Now, another pattern, I want to push right on with these. And this one is a push in the right direction, also known as match the diagram flow to expectations. And this is quite an interesting one. So all diagrams have a flow of information, even if they're structural. You've got an arrow going from in one direction and another going the other. So you have some kind of flow of information. Now, if we look at this data flow diagram here, when this was created, no thought was really put into how the audience are going to read the diagram. So if we look at this, we've got the customer where this diagram starts is actually down here in the bottom right, whereas as this is in English, we would expect to sort of start looking at it in the top left, or maybe at some point on the left here. That's what we expect. We don't want to have to spend time working out where this diagram starts and how to read it. So if we match people's expectations, this is exactly the same diagram, but look, here's our customer over here. And we also have all of the information that where we're making a request is going from left to right, and the information where we're getting a response from it is going from right to left. And that also helps because where we've done that all over, that also helps the person who's reading this diagram to understand. They don't have to keep flipping things around in their heads. And so this all runs left to right, and then information coming back right to left. And so just giving that standardization makes it a lot easier to read and takes it off people's mental load, because you want to make things really easy for people to understand. If you make it hard, people will either give up or get tired and annoyed at you. So you want people to be happy and to understand things quickly. Now, if you're creating a diagram such as this one, all you need to do to get this nice flow going across like this is to get all of your services, or whatever they are, at the top in the right order. If one of these was in a different order, we would get horrible zigzags all over the place. But because they're in this order, you can see that we get this nice, just sort of in and out, in and out. So with this, we're considering how our audience is going to read the diagram. It's not just thinking about who the audience is, but how they're actually going to get the message that we're giving to them. So that was a few of the patterns and anti-patterns from the visual section. Now we've got another section. Now I said I had one on knowledge, and this is partly about documentation, but documentation is only part of knowledge. And also I know that people don't like the word documentation, but this is all about creating that documentation you need and finding the knowledge that you want as well. So we're going to look at a few patterns to do with knowledge here. Now, the first one here is what I call products over projects, also known as organizing information by product. And even with Agile these days, many companies still organize their people and work around projects. And maybe that project's called Project Phoenix. If you've ever worked on a Project Phoenix, then you have my commiserations. I know I have. But let's move on from Project Phoenix, because we know it's a bad one. Now, what we do is with projects, we get people who work on this project, and we also get artifacts and documentation that are created for Project Phoenix. But that project actually acts on a product, and we hope really that that product's life cycle is going to be longer than that project, unless that project is sort of horrible, ongoing, forever project. But the problem with that is that you then get another project which is working on that product. And you can also get projects that are simultaneously working on the same product. So here's our next project. Maybe it's been more realistically named as Project Pigeon. And that first project's finished. So we get someone from that first project has moved on to this new one, but someone else, they've left the company. So we lose them. But then we've got our new documentation for our Project Pigeon. But then there's a question from this new person. And actually, oh, that's covered by the documentation in Project Phoenix. And because she worked on it, this person knows where to find that information. But what happens when we get all these other projects, which might be sequential, or they might be running in parallel? And then what happens when that original person leaves and everybody forgets about Project Phoenix? And who wouldn't want to forget about Project Phoenix? So finding this prior documentation is just hard. And we end up with documentation getting duplicated, information getting lost, and it just becomes harder and harder knowing if there's any prior documentation. And this is the kind of situation that you get. People feel like this crying panda because you just don't know where things are. And probably the stuff for Project Phoenix is probably in some legacy knowledge management system that nobody knows is there, or no one has the login details for either. So how can we sort this out? What we do is we look at having a product mindset rather than a project mindset. And a product-centric approach encourages thinking beyond that immediate project and focusing on a long-term view. And that can mean that software is designed to better meet changing needs. So in a project mindset, the focus is more on meeting deadlines, whereas with the product mindset, we're looking at a long-term view. With collaboration and reusability, these improve with a product mindset, and especially when there's more than one project or team working concurrently on the product, but also across sequential projects and product portfolios as well. We then get consistency. We can end up with templates and standards, which can emerge from finding best practices because everyone's got visibility into the product and all the projects that are working on it. And that leads to consistency across the projects, but also can lead to best practice being shared across products as well, across portfolios. We also get this visibility, and so you get this holistic view of the product rather than blinkered snapshots or duplication of artifacts, which you can get with this project-centered approach. And so with the holistic view, you better see the impact of changes and you can identify areas for improvement as well. We have a better customer focus because we're focusing on the product. That also lends focus to the customer who uses the product, and you don't end up losing knowledge of customer needs, which have been identified in various different projects. And you can also get continuous improvement. So with the product-centric approach, it encourages continuous improvement and evolution of software over time because of the holistic nature that you get of this information. So it's easier to identify all these areas for improvement. So if we link artifacts and documentation to this product here, we should always be able to find it, and we can make the link to a project as well. I'm not saying you can't have these links, but the project also should be linked to the product, and the artifact also needs to have that link to the product so that we can find these things. So the products become a kind of sun in an organizational solar system of information. Now, that's all very well, you say, but how do I actually do that? So here are some practicalities for this. You can create a centralized documentation portal and organize that by product. any knowledge that can't be stored there practically, or because people don't want it, you can link to it from that centralized portal. And the first steps to this, I always say, is to create just one page in your new documentation portal, whatever it is, and link to everything you can find. And then people have that front door to go through to go, okay, that's the information I need. They click on it and go to wherever it is. So create your front door, and then you can start migrating things when you want to. Now, using tags, this is very important, really, because folders are a very outdated system. They come from where we had filing cabinets and pieces of paper, and these days, most things need to go in more than one category. And so using tags helps you to do that. But using tags by themselves can become very overwhelming. So I'm going to say you need to use metadata, of which tags are a part. So metadata isn't just single items like tags would be, but metadata has a key value pair, which means it's much more obvious what it is. So if you decided to tag project names as just tags, and you had Phoenix and Pigeon, they're not particularly obvious, but if you have project Phoenix, project Pigeon, then with using your metadata with the key value, then you get that extra piece of information and people understand and don't just go, what on earth does pigeon mean? Because most people would probably not know. And then finally here, if you're going to be using folders, and you probably will end up using some folders, use them strategically, try to not use them too much, and then get your projects as high up in that hierarchy as you can, well, your product, sorry, because then you'll be able to find them, and then things are underneath that. Projects can then be underneath each product. But if you start moving things down in that hierarchy, like putting things by department or section of the business, then you start losing that visibility. So get your products as high up in your folder hierarchy as you can. And then you will get a happy panda. And yeah, you'll be much happier too. Now, another pattern here, which I've got, is architecture decision records, also known as recording the decision process and why. So ADRs aren't just for architects, despite the fact that they've got the word architecture in them. So other people should be using them. And I'm going to talk to you about other types of decision record as well. So these decision records record the decision and the reasoning behind it. So we get a couple of different types normally. They're either a lightweight record or they're actually used to enable the decision process itself. They let us avoid lots of different problems. And if you haven't come across architecture decision records, you're going to like this, because we want to avoid these things. What happens if you want to change an important decision? Maybe it's a long time after that decision was made and we've decided that, oh, we think we need to change this. But if you don't know how and why that initial decision was made, that change might cause huge problems. It may go against something really important, and you might not realize that until a lot of time and money has been wasted. We then have whack-a-mole decisions. This is a term from Birgitta Buchler of ThoughtWorks. And these are the decisions that regularly just keep popping up again and again, wasting time, reinvestigating them and working out, oh yes, yeah, we did make that decision for a reason. So you can avoid that because people can read the decision record and only spend 5 minutes on it rather than possibly 5 days and then realizing, yes, we should have done that. That was right. Then you've got onboarding. Now, when people are coming into a team, they should have lots of questions about why things were done. And you don't want to explain all this all yourself or work out who can answer that. So having all these ADRs means that you can just point people and go, right, part of the onboarding process is for you to read through these ADRs, and then if they ask you other questions, then that might be quite useful in finding some holes where you didn't actually record a decision, and then you can plug that hole. Then you've got staff turnover, and this is the really big one, because when people leave, they tend not to want to help you with giving you the answers to all these questions, especially if you come to them 5 years later on LinkedIn. They probably can't even remember. So staff turnover is a big problem when information walks out the door with people. So get it written down. Now, the book website, communicationpatternsbook.com, has got some examples on there. And so these two columns on the left here, these are actually both part of the same ADR. And that's an example there of how you can use it to actually make the decision as a team with other people giving input. And then on the right here, we have an example which is the same decision, but a much simpler example where it's just a record. So if you have a look on the book website, there is also a template which you can use for free as well. But creating an ADR is not the end of the story. It's quite easy to get people to create them. But actually using them, what we need to do is we need to store them where people can find and access them easily. It needs to be part of people's workflow to create them, but also to use them, because there's not much point in just creating them if people never actually refer to them, because people will then override things that have been written there as well. So make it really easy for people. If everybody's using Confluence, put them in Confluence. If they're decisions that are really about the code, maybe they're more design and code decisions, then maybe those should go in the repository actually with the code that they're about. And then whenever someone pulls the repository, they get all the decision records too. So I'm not saying you have to put all the ADRs in one place. They need to go in the best place where they're going to be used. Now, I said I was going to talk about other types of decision records, and these I call business decision records. And that's a kind of umbrella term which includes ADRs. Now, think about all the different places you make decisions in a business. There's procurement, whether that's IT related or not. There's security. Lots of decisions are made about what level of security we need to follow, which regulations we need to follow, that kind of thing. There's also hiring decisions and strategy decisions. And so when you're making these various decisions, you can record them in a very similar way and get all the benefits that you get with an ADR, because everybody will then know why the decision was made. And we can work out, oh, that decision was made 2 years ago, but things have actually changed now. And so let's sit down, work out what the best decision is now. And at that point, that's when you override that original decision. So when Vlad here joins a team and he needs to learn about a product, hopefully he hasn't just joined Project Phoenix, but he just gets pointed to the ADRs. He can read through them, he can get up to speed quickly, and he can find them because they're stored against the product and not the project. So he sees everything that's relevant. And when he needs to know about the authentication and authorization model for a product, he can have a look at some kind of template that was filled in. Maybe you have a security decision record. And so he saved so much time that he's even managed to make himself a cup of tea there. And we all want that extra little bit of time, don't we? So security decision records, architecture decision records, these are really useful things. So have a look at those. Right. Another part of the book is all about remote work. So this might be that you are completely distributed. You might have a hybrid workplace where different people are in on different days, or maybe you're all in the office every Wednesday. but there's probably at least one person you work with who isn't in the same room as you. Even if you're in an office, you're probably working with someone in a different country. And so this is all about gaining the advantages of distributed working and trying to mitigate any disadvantages that there are. Now, the first I have here is a pattern, and I call this async to think, also known as using async and sync communication aptly. And I'm going to give you some definitions first. Synchronous communication relies on all parties being available at the same time and responding in real time. So this is all about the backwards and forwards. This is going to be taking seconds or minutes. It's not going to be taking days. So asynchronous communication does not assume or expect the recipient to pick up or respond to the message as soon as it's received. And this type of communication can complete in minutes, but it typically completes in hours or days. Or if you're anything like me, the email in your inbox might not be looked at for weeks. Who knows? So the big thing here is you actually need a combination of both. Some people really evangelize one or the other, but you really need a combination, whether you're working remotely or in an office. And working out which to use, you can think about which direction you're communicating in. So if you're one direction or unidirectional communication, this often works best asynchronously and can even cause issues when it's done synchronously, even if it's just the fact that it's pulling people out of their time when they're really focused. And that can even happen if it's a virtual meeting. So even if you're not getting people together in the same room. When we think about bidirectional communication, this is where it varies a lot more as to whether asynchronous or synchronous communication is the best for any particular communication. So there's no black or white, which is better. Depends on the situation. As with anything in architecture, it depends. But generally, synchronous communication is better when you want to build rapport. So when you're doing team building or a project kickoff, that kind of thing. It also tends to be better for generating ideas such as solutions to a problem or ideas for the next big product that you're going to have. And then asynchronous tends to be better for things like gathering feedback. So you can things like ADRs or comments on a document, and also for disseminating information. So maybe there are some changes to the team structure or company benefits. But when it comes to reporting progress, this is much more of a grey area. So you've probably all been in a meeting where you're just getting loads of people updating and everyone's just looking at the clock, wondering why they're there. And it's just a load of project updates and everyone's just reading from a slide that they've had to make anyway. And you could have just read it and you don't really need the information anyway. So those kind of synchronous activities really need to become asynchronous. But if you're in a stand-up, especially if you've got more junior members in your team, then having that synchronous feedback and that being able to ask questions easily, that's much more useful to be synchronous. So a bit more of a grey area there. But one tip you can use when you're using both of these types of communication is creating an asynchronous sandwich. Now, I hope nobody's particularly hungry here, but we've got this asynchronous sandwich. If you're a bit more of a sweet tooth, then you can think of it as an asynchronous macaron. But when I talk about this sandwich, I mean that asynchronous activities are the bread or the outside of the macaron, and the synchronous activities are the filling. And the big thing here is that when we're together and doing something synchronously, be that virtual or in person, we want to maximize that time for things which benefit from being synchronous. We don't want to come together for 2 hours and fill an hour of that with activities which could have been done asynchronously, because it's a big waste of people's time, especially if some of those people don't even need to be part of it. So when you're planning your synchronous activity, you need to think, what could we do asynchronously beforehand and afterwards, and create this sandwich so that you're maximizing that synchronous time so that you've got extra time to do that brainstorming, to do that knowledge sharing, that questioning. And so you are maximizing your time. So the big thing here is to put thought into picking your communication methods. Now, oh, went too far. Written communication.
Just a second, Jacqui. We have one question about disseminate information in an asynchronous way. How do you know if it was received?
Good question. So a lot of things that we need to share with people aren't that vital, and so maybe you don't need to know that it was received, but maybe you just have an asynchronous method of people acknowledging it. And I hate email, so I'm not going to recommend that you send emails and get people to reply, but maybe you have some kind of system where people can have a look at, say you're using some kind of wiki. Quite often they have a way where you can just respond with an emoji or something like that. And so if you know that there are 10 people in this team and you've only got 5 emoji responses, then you can see that some people either haven't said that they've received it or haven't received it at all. And so you can start looking to prompt there. But I would say that a lot of this information, if you really think about it, you probably don't need people to go, yes, I've seen that, because it's not a legal requirement or something like that. But yes, have some asynchronous method for people to respond if you need it. Brilliant. So written communication. Writing is something that a lot of us don't put much effort into, but really we do it a lot. And so when we're looking at improving our communication, writing is one of the really good ways to do that. Now, this first one here is an anti-pattern, and I call this MLAH, also known as multiple letter acronym HELL. Oh dear, I created another acronym, sorry. And so the big thing here is that you should only be using defined acronyms. And I'll give you a couple of tips about where you can define your acronyms. So when you are speaking, you can say the acronym and also say the definition straight afterwards. And it's important to say both because you then give people that learning opportunity, because when someone says one or the other, they will still understand it. Now, when you're writing, which is the main thing we're talking about here, you can define the acronym the first time you write it, or you can use something like a key or a glossary. When you're creating diagrams, you can put them into a key if you're using acronyms in the diagram to save space. If you're writing something quite short, like a blog post or a small page in a wiki, then you probably just need to define it once at the beginning. If you're writing something really quite big, like some kind of white paper, you might want to consider defining it more than once. Then people don't miss out on that definition if they start reading something part of the way through. So here we go. A few acronyms you may know. I'm going to give you a few seconds for each one, just so that you can kind of play along in your head. So we've got DRY or dry. Have a think about that one. That one stands for, don't repeat yourself. Then we've got DFD. This is actually something that I spoke about a minute ago. That one is data flow diagram. Then we've got SPA. You've probably heard that one. Do you know what it actually means? probably a lot of you probably do. That one is single page application. And then how about BLT? I bet everyone knows this one. BLT is, of course, bacon, lettuce, and tomato. Or is it business leadership team? Or basic language translator? Is it bulk loading tool? Or is it just be like that? You get my point here. So acronyms can mean different things to different people, even if you grew up in the same neighborhood and went to the same university and end up working at the same company. Acronyms can mean different things to those people who are similar in so many other ways. It can mean the difference between watching Netflix and not understanding a particular acronym. So it's easy to fall into thinking that others have the same understanding as you because you live in your own brain, and everything, well, okay, most things probably make sense to you in your own brain. And so you have to try and get over that and understand that other people have completely different knowledge, a completely different kind of web of information in their head, and may read things completely differently. So next time you use an acronym, you can think SIDI or SIDI, which stands for state it and define it. And yes, I'm being silly there. I don't want to create yet another acronym, but I did just follow the acronym itself. Now, I said about writing. This is a pattern which I pulled together as a quick overview of several patterns which are in the book. So, employing techniques for better technical writing. Here are a few for you. The technical writing is very different to creative writing. You've got a very different audience for it. One thing that you can think about, and I'm not trying to take you back to your school days, but we're going to look at verbs, and there are weak verbs and there are strong verbs. And it's about getting a bit of a balance between these. You don't have to replace all weak verbs with strong verbs. But here's some examples. So on the left here, we've got the error notification happens when. The happens is a weak verb. If we change that to generates, the service generates the notification when, we get an awful lot more information into that sentence. It makes sure that people know that it is the service that is actually creating that notification rather than an error notification just happening. If it just happens, who knows what it's about? Here's another one. The vector is once the vector is entered, it is changed. We've got two weak verbs there. We can replace that with once the service receives the vector, it transforms. So again, we get a lot more information then. We know what's doing the transforming, and we know that it's the service that receives that vector. Just is entered could mean many different things. So that's one small one there. Now, consistent vocabulary, this is a big one. So throughout your organization, business, company or corporation, you want to try and use consistent vocabulary. Notice how there's lots of options there already. Do you have an application or a program, or is it software? Do you have a user, a client, or a customer? And are you an engineer, a programmer, or a developer? So you need to be consistent in which one of these you use. Otherwise, people won't know whether you mean the same thing or not. And when you do use different terms, you need to explicitly call that out. So maybe your internal customers of your platform are called clients, and maybe your external customers are called customers. So you need to define that and make sure that people know that when you're talking about a client, you're talking about somebody internal. When you're talking about a customer, you're talking about someone external. So that's just one example of many, which I'm sure you can think of. Now, another pattern here is audience empathy. We talked about thinking about who your audience is. And so this audience empathy is just thinking a bit deeper about their knowledge. So how much does your audience know, and how can you build on that? So if you state basic things that your audience knows, then you're going to put them off reading. So you can save yourself a lot of time and energy by then just building on that, rather than just annoying people with information that is really obvious to them. Does your audience know of something similar already? So if they know something similar, you can make comparisons to help them understand what you're talking about there. Does your audience have stale knowledge? If they haven't used that knowledge in a long time, maybe it's something they learned 10 years ago in college, you need to provide them with some kind of overview or some way of getting more detailed information so they can remind themselves if they need to. Also, does your audience have out-of-date knowledge? Technology moves incredibly fast, and so information changes even between one version of a technology to the next. So you can provide comparisons of the new and old and explain the disadvantages or advantages of this. So they may have knowledge of the product, but 4 versions ago, and things have probably changed a lot since then. So you need to work out what those differences are in order to help them learn. And so that is a whiz through. We will quickly go back to Nikki here. She was trying to work out what skills she needed to develop, and she's come up with this, yes, soft skills plus, I need to invest in this, whichever career path I'm going to go down. But it's not just about that, it's also about promotion now. Even if you're not thinking about management and technical, it's promotion. It's also looking at job security as well. If you have these soft skills, you're more likely to be passed over when it comes to when companies are looking to make cuts. Obviously, it's not a guarantee, but it can help. And so what I want to do is give people a chance, just for a few more seconds, to win this ebook. And I'm going to randomly choose a winner in a minute. And also we can look and see if there are any questions while I'm doing that. So that is your last chance there. And before I have a look at questions and choose a winner, I want to say thank you to everyone, and please come and find me if you're interested in particular in any consultancy or any training courses that I can run for you. Please reach out to me. Now I'm going to have a look at choosing a winner.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Jacqui, for that wonderful talk. Really enjoyed that. Many good knowledge nuggets to grab and put in practice. There was some comments flying through the chat. I think Christina did shout out a question that was put in there. So I know it can be sometimes really hard to go from listening to a talk to, oh my God, actually I had a question and now it's gone forever. I don't remember what my name is.
Yeah.
So I was actually wondering about, you mentioned about how do you, about product, the product mindset. And I was wondering about how do you do kind of effective collaboration when it comes to the centralization of the documentation? Because I mean, I'm sure people have been through this, right? People go like, let's agree to disagree, and we just put stuff where it's handy to me, and that doesn't work very well. So I wonder, how have you kind of bridged that gap to kind of bring people all to a nice thing that actually works?
Yeah, I think what I said about the about creating that initial page where people can where you go, right, okay, everything's spread across the organization. We don't want that. So let's create this page. I don't know if you know the strangler fig pattern from architecture, but it's a bit like that. So you kind of put this interface in front of everything, and so everything then goes through that interface, and so you create this kind of front door. And then if people are saying, no, I want this knowledge to stay over here, and you also get people use specific software, maybe for like customer support. They probably got their own like FAQ and stuff, and so that can't go there. But if you can create that link to it, you create that front door. And I think that is, if you're going to do nothing else, create that front door, and then you might be able to persuade people to move stuff eventually. But you're not going to persuade everyone. And yeah, I'm not going to try and give ivory tower ideas.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, it's about kind of getting closer to that. Do you have a winner?
Yes,
Ooh,
I
exciting.
do. And that is Maya. So congratulations to Maya. I hope I said that correctly, but I have your email address, so I will get an ebook sent to you. Congratulations.
Very nice. Maya, good. I hope you enjoy it. There's a couple of other questions in the chat. The first one that we haven't gone through is from Nicolas, and they are asking if the ADR template with the contrast function is available online, and if yes, if you can share a link.
Yes, so the ADR templates are on the book website, so I will put that. Hopefully I have spelled it correctly. I will double check. Yes, they're all on the book website, which is communicationpatternsbook.com. And you can find all those figures from the book there as well. So anyone who has the physical copy with the grayscale images can find all the color ones online as well.
Very nice. Thank you for that. So there's another question from M. Porobleki, and the question is, how does one change people's mindset about those things? I imagine like documentation is, but I think they are talking about these people who kind of don't want to write documentation, and I can kind of relate to that. You know, sometimes people just don't want to put the time into it. And what has been your experience with, I guess, bringing people to like why this is useful and such?
Yeah, I think there's two big aspects to that. One is showing people the advantages of it. So if you can do it yourself and show people how much better it is, then that's one way to help convince people. But the other thing is that a lot of this is it's not part of people's typical day jobs because it's not prioritized by the company. It's not part of people's normal workflows. They don't get, when you get your annual review, which most people still have to suffer, it's not part of that. And so you don't really want to put much time into something that's not going to get you anything back. And so if you're somebody who's actually got any clout and who is in charge of a team, then maybe you need to, and you want to get your team to do this, then you need to start thinking about how can I incentivize it? How can I make this part of people's day jobs, part of the workflow, part of what people get rewarded for? And so I think that's one of the really big things. People don't have time for extra work, so you have to make it not extra.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I like the I kind of got hints of also maybe trying to talk to people that are quite influential and kind of say, hey, maybe you should do it more and talk about how great it is. Influence is really cool. So there is one other question here from Paolo. If there's not a product, what should be the central concept of aggregation? Which I think is really interesting, because that happens sometimes when there is no central product.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think when you're in that situation, you probably got something which is central. And the end thing that you are looking to do is making things easy to find. And so there's going to be a way of making things more searchable and discoverable. And if that is just putting everything in one place or creating that front door, then you're on the road to making it a lot easier for people to find things. But when you're creating all these different artifacts, maybe it's a requirements or it's a particular, like a context diagram or something, there's going to be some central thing that you can organize these around, and getting that, finding what that is, it's probably something that you're going to have to sit down with other people and kind of work that out. But at the very minimum, you could tag all of your context diagrams so that they're easy to find, and make sure that they're labeled correctly, and so people know what they're looking at. And so if nothing else, you can do that. But yeah, that's a really interesting question.
I'm muted, like some sort of Zoom amateur or whatever. I think that's the last of the questions that we have in here. So if there's anything else from anyone, this is like your last call. Otherwise, we're gonna finish here. And I think this has been really, really wonderful, Jacqui. Thank you so much for your time. It's been great. Thanks a million.
It's okay. Feel free to find me online, everyone.
Excellent. I'll stop recording now. Boop.